Greetings and welcome. We are in Senior English B, and today we are talking now about the great Lord Byron. We will begin first by making some general observations about British Romantic writers, and more particularly poets. I think I've already said to you that the English Romantics are easily divided into two, what we will call, generations of poets. So the first thing you want to put in your notes, you want to have your hymnal open to 582, and you want to be working with 583, and the biography information as well there, right? I'm sorry, 852, 853. When we think about British poets, we will think about two different generations of British poets in the Romantic tradition. We will call them the old farts of Generation 1 and the young hellions of Generation 2. And there's good reason for this. We'll meet our first of the Generation 2 poets today in Lord Byron, but let's just make our quick list to make sure that we kind of know it. Generation 1, the old farts. Of course, the most important of the two, Wordsworth, Coleridge, and that production they call Lyrical Ballads, 1800, 1801, 1802. The others that we studied, you'll remember Blake, Burns. These are all Romantic poets of an earlier generation. Their views usually considered a bit more conservative, older, and so they have a different kind of view of the world than do these Generation 2 poets. The Generation 2 poets, let's list them. The Holy Trinity of Romantic Generation 2 poets: Byron, Shelley, Keats. Byron, Lord Byron, Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and of course the great John Keats. We will treat these K-E-A-T-S, Keats. We will treat these three poets then in order. So first we're going to talk Byron. Today that's who we speak of, okay? An introduction to Lord Byron and an introduction to at least some of his early work, okay? Then we will treat Shelley. Shelley, of course, has a girl. Her name is Mary Shelley. She at least changes her name ultimately. Mary Shelley. And she, of course, writes a little ditty called Frankenstein. Right. And then finally, the great John Keats, who dies gasping for his last breath in a small room in Rome. Now, wait a minute, he's Italian? No, he's English. Well, then why come he ends up in Rome? It's a really good question, and we'll get to it when we talk John Keats. Okay? Let's make some general observations, though, about these Generation 2 guys. Generally. One, they're all young, they live hard, they die hard. That is to say, they die young. All three of these guys share in common what you in your generation in time would understand, for example, about a musician like Kurt Cobain, a musician like Jimi Hendrix, and on we could go, right? We think in the 60s, 70s, and beyond of these musicians who were exceptionally gifted. We think of Tupac, for example. We can think of a number of these artists who are exceptionally, if you want to debate gifted, we'll at least say they're very controversial, they're very prolific in their output, and then they die. They die rather suddenly, right? They die without, having the chance to grow old, okay? These poets all share in common that. Number two, and very important for your notes, these Generation 2 poets, extremely experimental, okay? Extremely experimental. They basically, in many ways, invent that stereotype of the artist who is engaged in sex, drugs, and rock and roll. They pretty much kind of invent that idea. Very experimental, with the exception of Keats, who is experimental more in his poetic output than in his personal life. Byron and Shelley are just outright crazies in regards to the stuff they're willing to try. Byron and Shelley are pals. They are buddies, okay? They hang out together, and there's really some special times that they get together, and the product they produce is a pretty remarkable work, okay? They have tremendous respect for each other as poets and as writers, okay? So, for example, very experimental when we meet Lord Byron. So let's now turn to Byron. I'm on page 852, 853. Byron, in many ways, invents what we will call later the Byronic hero. Byronic hero. That's ironic, Byronic. Thank you. Right? Byron himself lives a very crazy, tempestuous life. Now, the first thing that we want to say about him is right there on 853, from rags to riches. He does end up very wealthy and is ascribed then this title of Lord. Are you ready for this? He lives in his own castle outside Geneva, in this large castle. The only way you can get there is to ride a little rowboat across that huge lake that he's created, so that way you can get there to his house. Okay, right. It's a moat. It's a moat. So that's how he gets. That's how you get there. This guy lives a life of opulence. But what's fascinating about him is that he also lives a life of high adventure. I often like to share this story with students because it says so much about Lord Byron. He was born with a club foot. That means that at birth, his leg was poorly formed. It was kind of deformed, and it went out the wrong way. He walked with a limp. He ends up in school. When he's there, the kids make fun of him because he walks with a limp. And on the day when it's time to do the little race, you know how they always do this kind of thing where everybody, okay, everyone line up, we're all going to run the race. He is painfully slow. They make him run it. He's painfully slow, and the kids laugh at him. Before he leaves school, he has another race with the same kids, only now years later, and he wins. Byron teaches himself how to sprint in spite of his limp, and he wins the race. Now this tells you, if you want, you can write down something. That little story tells you more about Lord Byron than a whole lot of stuff you could read about him. It tells you what about this cat? Incredibly focused, dedicated, incredibly competitive cat. He will say, literally, don't tell me what I cannot do. If I want to do it, I will do it. If I want to attempt it, I will attempt it. And he does attempt. He attempts a lot. And in the process, ultimately, he dies young because he lives so hard. You're maybe familiar with artists, again, like we said, who do this thing. They live so hard. And in the end, they die young because maybe of that, way they live. We might call it living life to the fullest, to go back to our days with Thoreau and Walden and all of that, right? They just live. Can we say it this way? The metaphor is sometimes they burn the candle at both ends. Do you know what that means? They burn the candle at both ends means what? Right, they live life really hard, and of course, because they live life so hard, their candle burns out way faster than probably it should, you see, that kind of thing. One other interesting bit of trivia here. You're maybe familiar in the 70s with a band named The Doors. It became a very influential, very controversial band in the 70s. The lead singer of that band was a cat named Jim Morrison, who became really infamous for all the crazy stuff he did. In many ways, people argued that he and the songs he wrote and performed changed fundamentally a lot of rock music. Morrison, for most of his adult life, in his back pocket, carried a folded up old collection, a volume, of the poetry of Lord Byron. This poet, Lord Byron, a 1970 artist who is known for doing all kinds of crazy things on stage, carried in his back pocket a folded up old volume of the poetry of Lord Byron. Why? When asked in an interview, he said it gave him the license to be free. That is to say, experimental. About Lord Byron, though, now we're going to turn and we want to make a couple of really important observations that start on page 852. I want to start with this literary analysis stuff. You want to make sure in your notes you've written this down. On 852, notice we're going to pay some time now to what we call figurative language. I'm hoping that you've got that term written down. Trust me, you're going to see that one on the exam and the 3 terms to follow. Now, of course, this is going to be in large measure, I think, review for you, is it not? Yeah. Most of us have heard the terms similes, metaphors, and personification, right? What you want to do is you just want to give your own working definition of each one of those three. And maybe more importantly, be sure that you can tell the difference between a simile and a metaphor. Of course, both of them have something to do with comparing things, right? A simile allows for the comparison that is driven by the words like or as. To say Schmelzer is like an oak tree, right, is an interesting simile. To say Schmelzer is an oak tree is what we'd call a metaphor, right? We'll not get into it as to exactly what that all means, you see. Right, we'll not get into it. Although, you know, Macklin, you could probably guess. I said properly. Personification, we want to put in our notes, as what? We're going to say about to personify. We are right. We're going to turn something that's non-human into something that's human. So, for example, about Ruthie's tree out there, if I were to talk about the arms of that tree, you would immediately understand me to be talking about what? The branches of that tree. Do you got me? I use the word arms, which is of or related to something human, and I apply it to something non-human, a tree. Do you got me? Poets love to do this. I'm interested to know why, though. Jot down in your notes, why do you think a poet, for example, might talk about the arms of Ruthie's tree instead of the branches of Ruthie's tree? Why would they do that? What is to be gained by personifying non-human stuff? It somehow forces the reader to relate in a closer way. It also can, of course, make you look differently at the tree. That's funny. I've never thought of a tree as having arms. I've only thought of a tree as having branches, you see. And the minute that I do that, there's an interesting kind of relationship that can be connected poetically in the imagination. The next thing I'd like to point out really quickly for you is the vocabulary that is provided on 852. Those 6 words, definitely recommend you write them down. Definitely recommend that you be looking for them as we now proceed into these readings. And we're going to begin first on page 854, 855 with the text, "She walks in beauty." All right? If you talk about Byron, you got to talk about girls. Here's why. And notice I said plural. Byron, very interested in girls. He likes girls. He likes to spend lots of time with girls. We won't get into it. Byron, as I said, is very experimental. But if you notice anything about players at Worland High, can I say this? If you notice anything about players at Worland High School, one of the things about guys who spend lots of time with different girls is that they seem to have more drama in their life. Have you noticed this? They seem to have more drama. That is to say, they have more peaks and valleys. Do you know guys like this? Who are constantly going after more girls, more girls, more girls. You will notice about them that they have lots and lots of craziness that seems to happen more often in their life. As opposed to a guy that finds one girl, kind of sticks with that one girl over time. Are you familiar with this, right? Now, it begs a really interesting question. Why do certain guys seem to have a tendency to want to constantly be with lots and lots of different girls, as opposed to just one girl? See, some of you will say, wow, that's fascinating you would ask me this question, because as I cast backwards over my 3 years at Worland High School, I immediately realize that a lot of guys fall into one of those two categories. They either are guys who spend a lot of time with a bunch of different girls, or they're a guy who found one girl, for example, early on in high school, and just kind of stayed with her. Now, of course, there's that third group who cannot seem to find any girl to which they can find any amount of time, energy to give to, even though there's options available. Why that's the case, maybe we'll get into when we talk Lord Byron as well. Hello, can we say it? If you see 3 categories of guys at Worland High School, 1, guys who are with lots of girls. 2, guys who have only one girl. 3, guys who are not interested in having a girl. The obvious question why the third group might be they studied the first two groups. Can you appreciate what I just said? Can you appreciate what I just said? It's altogether possible that one or two guys at Worland High School look at the first group and go, yeah, there's way too much drama involved in that insanity. Look at the second group and say, well, there's like a lot of freedom that gets lost if you're stuck with one person all the time. And then they say, the third group is where I'll belong until I'm not, you see. Of course, if the third group ever decides to bail out of that group, immediately has to decide, am I going to be in the first group or the second group? Am I going to be a player, or am I going to be more stable in my relationships with a single person? Byron, are you interested to hear this? Is definitely in the first group, but he would like to be in the second group. You might write that down. Which, by the way, may be true of pretty much everybody in that first group. Although, certain guys who I've lectured this poem say, nope, I'm in the first group because I like to be in the first group. Not interested in the second group. Second group, dangerous. Third group, just boring. Second group, dangerous. Because if you end up with the same person for a long time, you inevitably are going to get your heart broke in half. It's just a matter of time before things change. And then, of course, it's going to be all kinds of nasty drama. Much easier to just enjoy the experiences of the first group. About all of that, though, we would ask this simple question. What is it, and we'll stay at 3B for a moment. What is it at Worland High School that when a guy looks at a girl, he sees first? Go ahead, as you try not to laugh too loudly. Write that question, or smile. Write that question down. It is an interesting question. When guys at Worland High School look at girls, what is it that they see first? Another way to ask this is, what do guys at Worland High School, when they look at a girl, what are they most interested in physically? Physically. Okay, I'm going to ask a series of questions, then we're going to read the poem, all right? So if you'll write these down, this will be the subject then of some discussion. So the first question is, what do guys at Worland High School look at physically first when they look at a girl? First. What attribute of their physique, what attribute of their physical body do they look at first? By the way, hello. Our informal studies of this over the years in room 303 suggest that guys and girls have a different answer to this question. We'll ask maybe about both. Question number two. What about a girl's personality is contained in her physical? I'll ask the question again. Again, you notice that I like to ask these questions that come off seeming really simple until you start thinking about them. In other words, I'll ask it in an inverted way. Can you tell anything, underline the word anything, can you tell anything about a girl in terms of her emotions, the way she thinks, the way she really feels, from her looks, from her appearance, from the way she, I'm going to use a term, carries herself, the way she walks, the way she talks, the quality of her voice? Can you tell anything from those physical things about who she is on the inside? Again, often, guys and girls will have different responses to this. Sometimes, not always so amenable in terms of the differences of views here. Okay? That is to say, of or related to agreeing with each other. Okay? Right? Now, we can obviously ask the same question going the other direction. What is it that girls at Worland High School, when they look at guys, look at physically first? What's most important to them? Secondly, can you tell anything about a guy? For example, by the way he dresses. Really, is it true to say that we can draw judgments about guys at Worland High School by the way they dress? Or, for example, by the way they cut their hair? Can you tell anything about a guy, really, fundamentally, about who he is by the way he carries himself? Does that really, in the end, matter? See, we could go the other direction. The only reason why we're focusing primarily on what guys think of girls is because we're looking at a poem, very famous poem, by Lord Byron called She Walks in Beauty. Read with me on 855, top of the page. Are you reading with me? Hello. I've only asked you some of the 3B questions to maybe set your interest to say, okay, what's this getting? Hello? if a guy has spent time with a lot of women, that's Lord Byron, it might be interesting to ask him what he thinks about women. Would you agree with me?
Yes.
Right? It's a fair question to ask. Guys that spend a lot of time with girls, that are interested in lots of girls, not just one. Interesting question is, what do they think of girls when you ask them what defines a beautiful girl? Right? Right? I was many years ago with a group of athletes. We were getting off the bus heading into the Casper Mall. And I overheard one of the guys talking about the contest. And I was interested to know what contest we were referencing. And the guy said, we are at this mall for 1 hour and 30 minutes. Correct? And I said, that's correct. And we are privileged to stay only in the mall. Is that correct? And I said, that is correct. We are not allowed to leave the mall for any reason. Is that correct? And I said, not without authorization. That's correct. Can't come back to the bus even. Correct? Correct. All the other ball players are listening to make sure the rules of the contest are understood. In the hour and a half we are in the mall, see, some of you are smiling because you already know what the contest is all about. The question, of course, is how many girls' numbers can be derived in this amount of time? This is the contest. That is to say, ready, set, go. Some were running to the mall, others were walking slowly. As I was engaged in the conversation about why the contest at all? And is it ever possible that you would only want one number? Does that girl exist? That you literally would say, if I can get that number, that is all I need. To which the response was, not gonna happen. Impossible. Right? Impossible. The perfect girl does not exist. To which, of course, I was thinking, Lord Byron, the next question is, the perfect girl. What would the perfect girl look like? Now that's an interesting question to ask someone who doesn't spend a lot of time thinking, but only doing. Can you hear what I'm asking, right? What is the perfect girl? What does that look like to you? Well, let's listen to a guy who spends a lot of time with women talk about it. What is the beautiful woman really for Lord Byron? I'm on 855. The background information tells us Byron became identified with the rebellious heroes he created. You might want to write that word down. Rebellious heroes is the Byronic hero. Look at it. Brooding figures whose ironic attitude and hidden sorrow only added to their charm. That this kind of figure became known as the Byronic hero. See, there's the term. You see it on 855 at the top. Such heroes are a style of romantic literature. They survive in modern times as Hollywood or rock and roll stars. The Byronic attitude may be ironic, but Byron the poet was certainly capable of direct, sincere appreciation of beauty, as this poem demonstrates. What is a beautiful woman? Let's take a look. By the way, I'm going to make an observation here at 2B for just a moment, and then we'll come back to it. Byron at 2B. Byron loves classic poetic form. He loves it. But he likes to do within that form radical things, departures, for his time. For his time, right? Let's take a look. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes, thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. One shade the more, one ray the less, had half impaired the nameless grace which waves in every raven tress or softly lightens o'er her face, where thoughts serenely sweet express how pure, how dear their dwelling place. And on that cheek, and o'er that brow, so soft, so calm, yet eloquent, the smiles that win, the tints that glow, but tell of days in goodness spent, a mind at peace with all below, a heart whose love is innocent. You're supposed to go, aww. Yeah, there you go. Oh, good, good, good. Now, I'd like to point out something that sometimes is missed. Look at the punctuation at the very last line. Do you see it?
He's yelling.
Look at the punctuation at the very last line. Notice there is an exclamation mark, and yet, when you read the final stanza, you have a tendency to want to read quietly. As you look at these lines, we'll ask maybe, why is that? Byron is in a very reflective mood by the end of this poem as he thinks about what makes a beautiful woman. Now let's take a look at his she walks in beauty like the night. First at 2B. So are we ready? Here we go. I don't have much for time, so I'm going to hurry. First at 2B. Notice the construction of the poem. You may want to write it down. How many stanzas? Notice line configurations. Notice rhyme scheme. Night, bright, skies, eyes, light, denies. See how it works? Right? You got it, you got it. But wait a minute. Doesn't night and light rhyme?
Night and bright.
Oh, yeah. Less, tress, grace, face, express, place. See how that works? Brow, eloquent, glow, spent, below, innocent. Let's talk about rhythm. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes. See this? Ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. Do you see it, right? So we're definitely playing the iambic game, aren't we? Right, right. Notice there's an identifiable rhythm here that, can we say out loud, is like a song, right? Like a song. There's like, it's very, for your notes, very lyrical. Let's write it down. Lyrical. All right?
Is it iambic quadrant?
Well, we can debate that. We can debate it because notice he breaks his line, doesn't he? See how he breaks his line, right? So, you know, obviously we can debate it, but notice for sure, it's feet of iambic pentameter, or iambic, no doubt, no doubt. Go.
We should write another poem.
You can write as many poems as winter as you want. Mr. Kroger says, thanks for no, but no thanks. Right? Plus points. Always searching for those mysterious plus points waiting on the horizon, you see. All right, here we go. Now we're ready to exegete the poem. We'll do it quickly. What qualifies beauty? We'll begin, first of all, with stanza 1. What is the first thing that he will look at as he looks at a girl? Okay? She walks in beauty like the night.
Walk.
Let's write that one down. What do we mean by she walks in beauty like the night? What does that mean? What do you think? She walks in beauty. Say it loud for us, friends. And what does it mean to you? She walks in beauty like the night means what? Go ahead, Braxton. What does that mean to you? How she walks how? If you walk like the night, what does that mean? She walks in beauty like the night. Cloudless climes, starry skies. What does that mean? To walk like the night means what? Smoothly. Keep going. Dark means what? Night means what? Dark night means what? In regards to a personality type. Yeah, we think of it as close, like hidden, right? Which would be what? She walks in what way? You got it. Write it down. She's mysterious. The way she walks makes you want to know more about her. Byron liked the way a beautiful woman walks, right? As a famous writer once said, you can tell a millionaire girl by the way she walks. What? See, we can come back and debate this. Can you tell anything about a woman by the way she walks? Can you tell anything about a girl by the way she walks? Look at the next one. And all that's best of dark and bright. Here's the next thing that he looks at. By the way, that's interesting. The first thing he looks at least in this poem, is her walk. Look at the next one. Meet in her aspect and her... Now, I've had senior guys who say, the most important thing, in fact, that was part of the debate, because I asked, I said, how are you going to know when you walk into the Casper Mall which girls you're going to walk up to first? And one of the guys said, it's all about the eyes. Everything is about the eyes. Jot down at 3B if you agree with this or not, especially if you're a guy. Do you agree that the coolest thing about a woman is her eyes? The coolest thing about a girl is her eyes. I once had a senior that said, I learned how to fall in love with eyes on the playground in 3rd grade, and from then on, I was aware girls and their eyes, that's what matters most. There's something about a woman's eyes that are quite remarkable. Byron, by the way, are you ready for this? Byron loves a girl's eyes. He thinks everything is about the eyes. Really? Thus mellowed to tender light, which heaven to gaudy day denies, Her eyes are also mysterious. We want to write that down. Byron will say her eyes are also mysterious. And not only her eyes, but the way she looks with her eyes. Look at the next one. One shade the more, one ray the less, had half impaired the nameless grace which waves in every raven tress. Uh-oh. What's the next thing he looks at?
Hair.
Can you get a sense of this one? Tress means hair. Let's write it down. If the first thing is the walk, and the second thing is the eyes, the third thing is hair. Well, now this is interesting. Does hair matter? The way a girl wears her hair, does that matter? Does that say anything about her? Now, we've done inventories in 303 before about, okay, in the morning when you wake up, ladies, do you spend any time with hair? Does it matter? And if so, why? It's always an interesting question. Does hair matter at all? And, of course, let's start to make some interesting questions about hair. Is it a matter of color? So you might write these down and then you can start to think about it. Is it a matter of color? Does the color of the hair matter? Is it a matter of length? Does the length of the hair matter? Is it a matter of the way the hair is worn? Pulled back, for example, or over the face. Look at what he says. He says that waves in every raven... Uh-oh, what's raven mean? What's raven? Black hair. He loves jet black hair. Raven, black as a raven. Jet black hair. Raven tress or softly lightens o'er the face. Uh-oh. Right, so he kind of likes hair that kind of covers part of the face. This is always the interesting question, right? Do you pull the bangs back, away from the face, or do you rather cover the face? See, this is interesting, right? This is for Byron, these questions matter, right? Uh-oh, look at the next one. Her face is the next thing that he's going to look at. And about her face, he says something interesting. He says, her face where thoughts, serenely sweet, express how pure, how dear their dwelling face. Can you put that in your own words? She has to have a face that looks what? Innocent. Write that down. He doesn't want a face of a woman that's too hard. He likes her to look young and simple, innocent. Now this becomes obviously the question about makeup. I remember as we headed into the mall, there was a huge debate about this because several of our female trainers were along on the ride. And of course they were obviously attending to this entire discussion in silence until one of the guys said, she cannot have a bunch of makeup on. To which of course one of my female trainers asked, define a bunch. What does that mean, a bunch? And that of course led into a full discussion about the need for makeup as amplifying the beauty of the face. Some girls, of course, will say no makeup. Other girls will say very light makeup. Other girls will say lots of makeup. And then, of course, some women will say it all depends on the situation. Situations will determine whether lots of makeup, no makeup, etc. Now, guys, of course, who are sometimes ignorant of the art that is called makeup, they maybe do not completely comprehend. I remember one year we actually had a young woman who talked for about 5 minutes about what makeup is all about in terms of putting it on, moving it. One of my male students was stunned and said, I didn't know it took so much time out of your day to be engaged in this kind of activity. And then, of course, the question was, did you not have any sisters? And he went, no, all brothers. And the girl went, I got it. Because you know, if you grow up with sisters in your house, you learn something about the time needed in a bathroom and the like, you see, that kind of thing. And on that cheek and o'er that brow, uh-oh, here we go, the last stanza. And on that cheek and o'er that brow, so soft, so calm, yet eloquent, the smiles, uh-oh. Now, on our time walking into that mall, one of the guys said that. If she doesn't have a smile, I am not interested. I am not interested, he said, in the girl that goes to the mall and sits there or walks in the mall like she's bored to tears and has no interest in being there, completely detached. She has to have a smile because that tells me she has a sense of joy, personality, which of course again is the subject of debate. Notice eloquent. What does eloquent mean? Write that word down. What does it mean to be an eloquent girl? What does it mean, majestic or eloquent? Can you give a personal definition of what that even means? She has a way of carrying herself, and in her face, she's eloquent. By the way, does that mean rich? No. Do you think? Does that mean rich? Like she has money? Is that what it means? See? It's an interesting question. The smiles that win, the tints that glow, but tell of days in goodness spent, a mind at peace with all below, a heart whose love is innocent. That's an interesting ending to this poem. He seems to like and want to be with girls who are young and innocent. Why do players like girls who are innocent? See, that's an interesting question. Why do guys go for girls if they're players who like girls who are young and naive? Some of you will say, well, that's so self-evident a question, why even ask it, you see. And others will say, wow, I never thought about that. All right, there you go. Lord Byron, your first introduction.